Chapter 5. Location: Los Angeles, California. Date: June 17th. Abigail Nelson. Abigail walked in the door, groceries in hand. A loud thud came from the back office, followed by a ripping sound. Gabe had gone out before she left, and even when he was home, he worked in silence. She put the groceries down on the floor and grabbed the closest solid object she could find, an umbrella sitting in a bucket next to the door. Not as solid as she would have liked, but she wasn't about to get caught in her own home without something to defend herself. She'd been on edge since they'd come home 2 days ago. Caden Bachman was after the daggers. He knew Ellie still had one of them, but he didn't know what had happened to the white dagger. Abigail assumed that was what Gabe had used as leverage, but he hadn't told her. Hadn't talked about his exchange with the demon at the cabin. She held the umbrella over her head and tiptoed through the living room. Something heavy crashed against the floor, and there was a loud scraping sound. She rounded the corner into the hallway. Gabe's office door was slightly ajar. He always left the door shut when he was out training with Treadon. The thought made her want to sag with sorrow. Her main goal, since she'd invited Gabe to stay when Treadon was only a baby, was to keep Treadon safe. Ignorant of the war she and Gabe had been battling, now Gabe was training him to fight. She couldn't keep him safe anymore. Anger rose in her with a rush, and she took the last few steps, kicking the door open with a yell. The door smashed against the inside wall. She brought the umbrella down, breaking it over Gabe's head. Abigail let out a squeak. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it was you. I thought there was an intruder." Gabe rubbed the top of his head, glancing at the broken umbrella in Abigail's hands. "And what was your next move once you'd stunned the intruder for 3 seconds? Abigail looked down, embarrassed. She hadn't had a plan beyond taking her anger out on whoever or whatever had been in this room. She was half tempted to hit Gabe a second time, just to make herself feel better. "I would have hit harder if it hadn't been you," Abigail said. She noticed the state of the office. There were boxes on the desk, half full. The futon was folded up and shoved against the far wall, covered with books and other items waiting next to an empty box. "What are you doing?" "I wanted to make sure everything was in order." Gabe kept his eyes on the desk, running his finger along a grain of wood. Abigail pushed away the thought of what it would be like to have him touch her like that. His concentration, his gentle movement. Abigail put a hand on her neck to cover any evidence of the heat she felt rising to her skin. "What are you talking about? You always keep everything in order. I've never seen you have anything out of place." "I want you to be prepared." Gabe lifted his compass stand from the desk. The compass wasn't there. Maybe he'd already packed it away in a box. She'd never seen the office without it. "If anything happens to me, I need you to keep the dagger safe. You know where it is." That's when she noticed the bag on his shoulder. One leather strap pressed across his chest, his shirt tight against his skin. He was packing his things up in boxes. He had a bag across his shoulders. "You're leaving?" Abigail asked. "I haven't seen another Unguarded on the map. I wouldn't know which direction to send you." Gabe shifted the strap on his shoulder. "This is a different kind of trip. I'm not sure how long it will take." "What aren't you telling me?" He looked up at her for the first time, meeting her gaze, freezing her in place and making her heart speed up. "If you do see another Unguarded, don't send Treadon and Ellie. They're not ready. Keep them safe." Abigail couldn't catch her breath, and it wasn't just the intense focus of his gaze. Caden Bachman was back and had found them in Oregon. Now Gabe was acting like he wasn't going to be around if he came again. "What if he finds us?" she asks, her words more air than substance. "What if he comes here to find what he's looking for?" "He won't hurt you," Gabe said. He took a step forward like he could press his assurance into her soul with his nearness. "I've put precautions in place, but if something changes, if you think you're in danger here, go to the sanctuary." "Where you take the Unguarded?" Abigail had never been to the place he took the rescued Unguarded, the children just coming into their abilities that were in danger of being taken by Caden Bachman. "I've never been there. I don't know the way. I don't understand why you're leaving now if Caden is back. We should be doing the opposite. You should stay here. We should make a plan. A way to keep Ellie safe even though she's ready to go in kicking and swinging. She's not ready. Treadon's not ready. I'm not ready. You can't leave." Gabe stood too close. She tipped her head back to keep eye contact with him. His hands gripped the strap on his satchel like he was holding himself back. "I have to go. There are things that I'm leaving behind that can't be taken." He glanced around the room. His change in focus snapped Abigail out of her fear. She was stronger than this. She wasn't a frightened child. She would do anything to protect her son, and she wasn't going to let that change whether Gabe was here or not. I will keep it safe. I will protect them with my life. Abigail straightened her shoulders and wiped the emotion from her face. Gabe's gaze snapped back to her, and his mouth opened a slit, not wide enough for words to slip out. Words she knew he couldn't say. He licked his lips, mirroring her own posture. It seemed to take something from him, but she couldn't tell what. I'm doing everything in my power to keep you safe. Not everything is in your control, Abigail said. He flinched when she said that. A small twitch in his eye sent a ripple of concern through her. He wasn't telling her everything, but she was used to that by now. Except he'd never left her before. Not like this, not without reason. I will show you how to get to the sanctuary. Gabe lifted his hand toward her face. Abigail leaned away. You can't. If I know and they catch me, they can get the information from me. We are putting all those children at risk. My safety isn't worth that. A vein protruded on Gabe's temple. You are worth far more. He touched her cheek, his large hand covering the side of her face, his body leaning in toward her, his forehead pressing against hers. She closed her eyes and breathed him in. He smelled of leather and shampoo, his skin warm against hers. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, leaning her face against his fingers, rough skin brushing against her cheek. She felt a shift in her as he sent the information into her mind, the location, the image, the sense of the sanctuary. She wouldn't be able to give directions, but if she ever needed to find it, the place would call to her. He held her longer than necessary. She knew he had implanted the location in her mind. Yet he held her there, in that same position, the closest they had been, the longest they had touched in the last 18 years. He was driven with a single-minded focus on his mission for Adura, but something had shaken him, and for a moment, he was vulnerable. She leaned her head to the side and looked up. All he had to do was pull back, but he flowed with her motion, his nose touching hers, sliding to the side, their lips a hair's breadth apart. And then he kissed her. Let his mouth press firmly against hers. He brought his other hand up to cup the other side of her face. Her heart leapt into her throat. Warmth spread through her from her center to the tips of her toes. She closed her eyes and held this moment, capturing it in her mind as firmly as the location of the sanctuary. As much as she wanted this, wanted him, she could sense the hesitation, the battle raging in him, ripping him apart. She placed her hands on his chest and pressed firmly. She was surprised how much breath was pulled from her lungs as their lips separated. She had to swallow twice before she could speak. I have it. She nodded, not dropping her hands as quickly as she should have. If anything happens, I will take Ellie and Treadon to the sanctuary. Gabe's head dropped in acceptance. Abigail folded her arms, completing the cushion of freezing cold air that had filled the space between them. Are you going to look for her? She asked. He could tell her the truth about that. He owed her that much. No. His voice was deep and raspy. There's something else I must do. Of course. She hated herself for the rush of emotions that filled her. Anger, betrayal, understanding, sympathy. She wanted to hate him and yearned to pull him back into her arms at the same time. He closed the box with a piece of tape and set it on top of the others. Then he nodded to her. Thank you. He stepped out the office door. She stood, unmoving, unable to make her mind sort through what she was feeling. He stopped, one hand pressed against the doorframe. Abigail. She couldn't turn to look at him. I'm sorry for everything. You deserved so much more than this world has offered you. And then he was gone. When she finally let her mind touch on the memory of the kiss, she tingled with the warmth of it. She placed her fingertips on her lips as she let her mind accept what the moment had meant. Gabriel Tuoer had said his last goodbye.